Almost every night, just before sleep, a familiar ritual begins. The lights are off. The world is quiet. Your body is still. And suddenly, your mind turns on. Scenes unfold. Conversations that never happened. Futures that haven't arrived. Alternate versions of your life where things went differently, where you said the right thing, where you were braver, calmer, more admired, more understood. Sometimes the scenarios are comforting, sometimes they're tense. Sometimes they replay the same themes again and again with small variations. And as your body drifts towards sleep, your mind builds entire worlds that exist nowhere except inside you. People often dismiss this as overthinking or just imagination. But the psychology of people who imagine fake scenarios before sleep runs much deeper than idle fantasy. These mental stories are not random. They are structured, repetitive, emotionally charged, and they serve a very specific psychological function. To understand why some people imagine elaborate scenarios before sleep, you have to understand what happens to the mind when external stimulation disappears. During the day, attention is pulled outward. Tasks, conversations, responsibilities, screens. At night, those anchors fall away, and when they do, the mind turns inward. Whatever hasn't been processed during the day rises to the surface. For people who imagine fake scenarios before sleep, the mind doesn't rest when the body rests. It reorganizes. One of the first things to understand is that these scenarios are rarely about escapism alone. They are about emotional completion. Many people who replay or invent scenarios before sleep are carrying unfinished emotional loops. Conversations they didn't get to finish, feelings they didn't get to express, versions of themselves they didn't get to be. Sleep creates the first quiet space where those loops can surface. The mind uses imagination to simulate resolution. This is especially common in people who suppress emotion during the day, people who stay composed, rational, functional, people who don't have space to process openly. At night, the nervous system finally loosens its grip, and imagination becomes the language of what was never spoken. Another critical factor is control. Fake scenarios offer something real life often doesn't. Total control. You control the setting, the dialogue, the outcome. You say the perfect thing. Others respond exactly as you hoped or feared. For people who feel powerless, misunderstood, or constrained during waking life, nighttime imagination restores agency. This doesn't mean they're disconnected from reality. It means reality didn't give them enough room. Many people who imagine scenarios before sleep are highly reflective. Their minds don't shut off easily. They process experiences by revisiting them internally. But because the brain is tired, this processing becomes narrative rather than analytical. It turns into stories. Stories are how the brain integrates emotion. Another layer is identity rehearsal. Fake scenarios often feature an idealized or protected version of the self. You're calmer, wiser, more confident, more respected. This isn't narcissism. It's psychological experimentation. The mind is testing versions of selfhood in a safe environment. Before sleep, defenses are lower. Creativity is higher. Judgment softens. This is prime territory for identity simulation. People who imagine fake scenarios are often deeply imaginative, but not in a whimsical way. Their imagination is functional. It solves emotional problems. It rehearses outcomes. It prepares for possible futures. It compensates for missed pasts. Another important point: these scenarios often repeat. The same themes show up again and again: recognition, redemption, conflict resolution, escape, belonging. That repetition is a clue. The mind is circling something unresolved. Repetition means relevance. The brain doesn't replay what doesn't matter. There is also a strong connection between nighttime scenarios and hyperempathy. Many people who do this imagine not only themselves but others' reactions. They anticipate how people might feel, respond, judge. Their mind runs social simulations constantly. This is not anxiety by default. It's social intelligence turned inward. But when that intelligence has nowhere to go during the day, it shows up at night. Another misunderstood aspect is that these scenarios are not always pleasant. Some are embarrassing, Some are confrontational, some are painful. People replay worst-case outcomes, imagined rejections, conflicts that haven't happened yet. This isn't self-sabotage, it's threat mapping. The brain evolved to predict danger. At night, with fewer distractions, that prediction engine runs freely. For some people, imagining negative scenarios feels safer than being surprised by them. If you've already lived the pain in your head, it feels less dangerous if it happens in real life. This pattern is common in people who experienced unpredictability earlier in life. When the world once felt unsafe or unstable, the mind learned to simulate outcomes to regain a sense of preparedness. Another psychological truth is that bedtime imagination often replaces external soothing. Some people use music, stories, or screens to fall asleep. Others use their own mind. The scenarios create emotional regulation, comfort, familiarity, even excitement. The mind tells itself stories until it feels safe enough to rest. There is also a dopamine component. Imagination can be rewarding. Positive scenarios trigger pleasure, hope, and anticipation. Negative ones trigger intensity and alertness. Either way, the brain stays engaged. For people whose minds crave stimulation, silence feels uncomfortable. Imagination fills that gap. But none of this happens randomly. The psychology of people who imagine fake scenarios before sleep reveals minds that are active, sensitive, emotionally unfinished, and highly narrative-driven. These people don't stop thinking because thinking is how they regulate. Another essential layer behind imagining fake scenarios before sleep is how closely this habit is tied to safety. For many people, bedtime is the only moment when they are no longer required to perform, respond, decide, or protect themselves socially. The body lies down, but the mind finally has permission to roam. And when that happens, it naturally returns to what it knows best: patterns. Fake scenarios are not fantasies in the shallow sense. They are familiar emotional architectures. The mind rebuilds situations it understands because familiarity feels safe. Even painful scenarios can feel safer than uncertainty, because at least the outcome is known. This is why people often imagine the same types of situations repeatedly. The same kind of conversation, the same kind of recognition, the same kind of conflict, the same kind of escape. These aren't random stories. They are emotional blueprints. Another important factor is that many people who imagine scenarios before sleep are highly self-aware, but underexpressed. They think deeply during the day, but rarely say everything they feel. They edit themselves. They choose restraint. They prioritize harmony, logic, or responsibility over emotional release. At night, that restraint dissolves. Imagination becomes the only space where the unfiltered self can exist. This is also why the imagined version of the self is often more articulate, more assertive, or more admired. It's not ego. It's compensation. The mind is restoring balance by giving expression to parts that stayed silent. Another psychological truth is that bedtime imagination often replaces emotional witnessing. Many people were never fully seen or emotionally mirrored earlier in life. No one reflected their feelings accurately. No one stayed present while they processed. Over time, the mind learned to become its own witness. At night, the mind watches itself. The scenarios create an internal audience. Someone is finally listening, even if that someone is imaginary. There is also a strong connection between this habit and creativity. People who imagine scenarios before sleep often have rich symbolic thinking. Their minds naturally turn experiences into narratives. They don't process life as isolated events, but as stories with arcs, characters, and meaning. This doesn't always turn into art, but the structure is there. For some, these scenarios are the seedbed of creativity. Ideas emerge, dialogue sharpens, emotional insight deepens. The mind uses story to understand itself, but creativity and anxiety are neighbors. Another layer is anticipatory coping. Many imagined scenarios are rehearsals. The brain is preparing for future interactions, practicing responses, testing outcomes, reducing uncertainty. This is especially common in people who value competence and emotional preparedness. They don't like being caught off guard, so the mind practices at night. Another important distinction is between voluntary imagination and intrusive imagination. Some people choose to imagine scenarios because it helps them relax. Others feel trapped in it. The same mechanism can soothe or exhaust depending on how much control the person has over it. When imagination feels nourishing, it's often because it brings comfort, mastery, or meaning. When it feels distressing, it's often because it loops without resolution. Loops indicate something unresolved. Another psychological factor is emotional timing. Many people simply don't have the energy to process emotions during the day. The brain prioritizes function. At night, when demands drop, the emotional backlog surfaces. Imagination becomes the processing tool. This is why trying to just stop thinking rarely works. The mind isn't misbehaving, it's catching up. Another overlooked aspect is that bedtime imagination can serve as a transitional object. Like a story told to a child, the scenarios help the mind move from wakefulness into sleep. They create continuity, a bridge between conscious control and unconscious rest. For some people, falling asleep without these scenarios feels unsettling. Silence feels empty. The mind reaches for story the way a child reaches for reassurance. This does not mean immaturity, it means self-soothing. Another truth is that people who imagine fake scenarios before sleep often live highly structured or constrained lives. They follow rules, meet expectations, hold responsibility. Imagination becomes the only space without consequence. In imagination, you can fail safely. You can succeed fully. You can be everything without risk. That freedom matters. But there is also a point where imagination stops serving and starts stealing rest. When scenarios escalate anxiety, when sleep is delayed, when the mind refuses to disengage. That's not because imagination is wrong. It's because the system is overloaded. The mind is asking for something it isn't getting during the day: expression, safety, resolution, or rest. Understanding this reframes the habit entirely. Instead of asking, "How do I stop imagining?" the better question becomes, "What is my mind trying to complete?" Completion doesn't always require action. Sometimes it requires acknowledgement. If you imagine scenarios before sleep, you are not broken, obsessive, or disconnected from reality. You are someone whose mind uses narrative to regulate, integrate, and protect. Your imagination is not the enemy. It is a messenger. When listened to gently, it reveals what matters to you, what hurt, what you want, what you fear, what you didn't get to finish. And when those things are slowly addressed in waking life, the mind often quiets naturally at night, not because it's forced to, but because it no longer has to work so hard to be heard.